Do that.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is a business health summit, and we will talk very plainly about what business health is. I will be introducing myself, Dr. J.C. Baker, along with Julie Blinko and Jackie Connaughton, as we are collaborating on this summit, if you will. And so, as I was speaking a little bit earlier, is that we really hope and kind of mandate that this is a discussion. And so we'll create some points out there, but we'll also be including you all to provide your experiences, your thoughts, your challenges, so that we all can take something away from this conversation that we're going to have for the next hour. And so as I jump in here first, we talk about my work. I own the business hospital. It's the only one of its kind in the world. We do business in 14 countries currently, looking for a 15th. And so this is one reason why we want to do more in the UK if we can. But essentially, my work is exactly what it sounds like. I am a business doctor, and I treat businesses just like a medical professional would treat the body. And so I invented the Business Health Index, and everything that I do and the way that we go about our work is looking at a business as if it is a body and it needs to be healthier. So there's 22 different methods or metrics rather that every business needs to be healthy. And that is how we go about treating our patients. We have treated over 1,300 patients worldwide, everything from retailers to gold mines in South America and everything in between. We also help really large companies such as like NASA or the National Football League. So our diversity exists in the fact that there is a standard way of treating businesses, and there's a measure of health that they need to have. And so I do that with my team of practitioners, my business hospital wings, and our pharmacy of businesses. So this is not marketing. It's not a brand. It is a very literal thing. I write real prescriptions. I give real rehab, and we do everything in a measure of health. And so that's us. And this is just imagery as to how we look at a business in comparison to how a medical physician looks at the body. And so when you think of us in very literal terms, that I'm an actual business doctor with a team of other practitioners helping me provide treatment to businesses. From there, I will pass it along to the Business Health Institute, which our names are very similar, but I'll let Jackie and Julie talk about themselves here.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Baker. We're Julie and Jackie from the Business Health Institute. And the reason why we're aligning with the Business Hospital is we fall into the human capital aspect. We help bridging the gap between your people and your business strategy. And if you understand where your gaps are, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little. If you understand where your gaps are, or you don't know, which is the real challenge in business, that's where our data and analytics come in to support your people and align them with your business strategy. So my background is in finance. I'm used to navigating financial aspects of a business. However, what I now do is measure the people aspect of the business. Jackie, I'll let you explain your history.
Thank you and welcome everybody. As Julie said, I'm Jackie, one of the co-founders of Business Health Institute. And a little bit to follow what Dr. Baker said, we actually measure the blood pressure of the people and the organisation. So we all know that a standard blood pressure is 180 over 120 over 80, should I say? And that's that's a real healthy diagnosis. But we want to understand, what is your people's blood pressure? What are your organisational blood pressure? We want to get to the root cause of what's going on to help you make that difference. As Julie said, bridging the gap between the people and the organisation. My background is in well-being, in mental health. I've worked in mental health for the last 20 years. So I bring that side of my knowledge and experience into the business world.
Thank you so much for that, Jackie. And as we move forward, you're going to see essentially a quote here. And inside of this quote, which I will not read to you all directly, but I'm going to start looking for your participation, is connecting and aligning your business strategy with the well-being of your team members. And when I say team members, what I want you all to think about are 1, employees, 2, contractors, and then 3, strategic partnerships. So I don't know how all of your businesses are set up and how they're aligned, But I think what we do understand is that if your well-being isn't there, then people's participation and engagement is going to decline, and it's going to decline substantially. And that has a profound effect on your bottom line. So with that, as I'm calling out on you all, does anyone or can anyone provide an example that they've seen in your leadership or in your ownership where when somebody isn't feeling so great about what you're doing, a decision that you've made, how the industry has changed, the demands of the job, how that has affected their engagement, and what did that mean to your bottom line, or what did that mean to your scalability? Does anyone offer any insight on that? And I will tell you, I like volunteers, not hostages, so I'm going to start holding people hostage if I don't volunteer.
Hi, I'll volunteer.
Thank you, Miss Brenda.
Yeah, Brenda's fine. Thank you. How are you today?
Fantastic.
So I'm an executive coach. I have a leadership development and coaching practice, and I work with a number of nonprofits. And there are a lot of circumstances where mission drives, and there is an absence of expectations, and I'll say alignment of values and expectations. And so there are a number of situations active right now, actually, where the intentions of the organization are not aligned, an organization are not aligned with the expectations of people who are there to implement.
Mm-hmm. And when that happens, it makes it very difficult to, one, achieve any kind of goal.
Right.
Number two, it starts to derail you from the plans that you've had. Now you've got to create secondary and tertiary plans, or you have to replace people, or you incur additional costs. All of those things become problematic for your overall health of your business. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it creates a lot of noise. You spend a lot of time trying to reconcile and in arbitration and things like this, and not really focusing on the work.
Absolutely. And when you think about the reason why you're coming together from a health standpoint, is that at some point somebody articulated a shared vision, whether they got with you because they want to make more money or because they want to accomplish a thing, whatever it might be. But now we've got this other, which you call noise, in the way. And so with that, as you're trying to move forward, now you're less efficient. You've got an anchor on, you got an anvil pushing you backward. And for all of us that are in business, that's not what we're in business to do. We're in a business to accomplish, to achieve, not to go and rehash things that we thought that we've already had together, but the low engagement increases low health. And so thank you for sharing that for us, Ms. Brenda. We're going to switch to the next slide, and I want everyone to take a look at essentially this performance grid or map, if you will, and then we'll have the ladies from the Business Health Institute kind of walk us through this. But as we're walking through this, what I would like everyone to do is just think about how this fits in your organization. And I want to hear from any one or two of you how this fits to you currently. And if it doesn't, can it, in order to make you either more efficient or better at what it is that you're doing? Jackie or Julie?
Thank you, Dr. Baker. So this is an ideal business strategy and employee engagement model. Starting a business, and as Brenda's just shared with us, you have a business vision and a strategy, and you recruit the people, and you want them to align with that business strategy to perform your objectives, be that profitable or unprofitable. You want them to align and achieve those objectives and be optimal in that role. How do we achieve that? Well, we start because we want clarity, we want their engagement, we want to execute that roadmap and evaluate. It's helpful if people they align with those values. We're providing them with flexibility and autonomy in that roles. They understand their contribution and they're connected to that business vision. My question would be how do we identify those areas of disconnect? What is it in your business that you may wonder about? As Brenda said, you've got that noise. What's causing that noise? What we use at Business Health Institute is data to unravel that noise, to pinpoint exactly where that noise is coming from, so that you can come back to your focus on your your strategy and activity in the organization, align those people for the best return on investment, and close that gap of disconnection. So has
You
anybody?
I
actually
want to jump in. I want to jump in real quick because you asked a question. I'm very interested in hearing from the audience if they will participate on this question. Is how do you identify engagement? You mentioned, Julie, that at the Business Health Institute, you use data for that. What I know through experience and what I know out of being a global business doctor is that not many businesses have the appropriate data to make that determination. So if they don't have the right data, they don't understand the right metrics, then what the heck are we using? Is anybody willing to tell me what in the world they're using to determine engagement amongst their constituents?
We built a
And
platform to do that.
I'd also like to know, how do people know what's behind the disengagement?
Well, absolutely. Well, Anthony said they built a platform for that, but guess what, Anthony? You all understood the problem, and therefore you went to seek to create a solution for that problem. So you're actually in that business of bridging that gap. But others here aren't necessarily in that line of work. And I wonder if one, if it's even been a flag for you, then number two, if it is a flag, how do you measure it?
And he explains a little bit about what they were thinking about when they at least built the platform. You know, what are, because for the measurement, what would it be?
Sorry, Doug, can you repeat that? You broke up a little then.
Yeah, well, Doug was wondering what were some of the considerations that had Anthony build out the platform. So he wants to know, what did they think about when they started to put inputs in for that platform to measure?
Sure. Well, it started with a real simple idea of just kind of trying to find a way to meet people where they were, to aggregate their voice over an organization. So many people provide their thoughts, their considerations, and I think Julie mentioned noise. That's actually what it ends up being without a process, without a way to put that feedback together. And so we set out to provide organizations a platform to get the feedback on the things that those stakeholders at different levels care about. What is it? And for every organization, it's different. I mean, when we're talking about aligning people to organizations, or the organizations to its people, that looks different for every organization, because every organization is a group of people and all people are a little bit different. But how do you give people a voice to be heard? And that's how they kind of start to feel that engagement, right? Or that connection to the business. And you know, I think it was mentioned earlier about the aligning to an organization's vision or mission. One, putting that in front of your people in a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and basis, and then asking them, how am I doing as your manager? How are you doing? How do you think you're doing as an employee? How do you think your peers are doing? And opening up that conversation. I think it just starts with really having a conversation and then tracking it, because what ends up happening is so many of our engagements are siloed. You know, you were asking, well, what was the process? Well, one of the challenges all organizations have is that all those processes, in fact, all of that data ends up siloed. And there are kings sitting at the top of these data piles, but they're at the top of a data pile. None of them have the contextualized understanding. So while data is critically important, I'm in the data business, it's actually about contextualizing data in a way that's digestible, where everybody can buy into the objective historical narrative. Like, how did we actually get here? So how do we do that? Well, we work with organizations to find out what matters to their people, and then how do you, at the right kind of moments, engage and get that feedback. And we do that in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that is really effective is the actual engagement, the meeting, this collaboration, and then having it done in a way that it's not just another thing in your day that you just move on from, where the data sits in somebody's individual notes, it sits in some read.ai, it just sits somewhere. That actually doesn't help. It makes you feel good, it makes you feel like you're doing something, but it actually doesn't do anything. So
I think it's also important to say, Anthony, is that, you know, what we measure is we're not measuring people's opinions, because you can't remeasure an opinion, because that could change from
exactly
one
right.
moment to the next. So we ensure that what we use is from a South African university, and it's accredited, and it's
Objective,
Psychometric
measurable.
assessment.
psychometric assessment. I couldn't think of the word then. Thank you, Julie. So yeah, so it's very rigorously tested, and so it's not measured. We're able to remeasure. As I say, it's not opinion based. I think that's important as well.
And also, I think your model is coming from possibly a different slant, Anthony, than this model. This model is the same across organisations, whereas you're varying it, but it's measuring the key risks at that particular time, and that is based on a model of job demands and job resources. So it's what are your job demands? Are the people engaged? Have they got you know, does their lifestyle support that? Have they got personal challenges? So we're combining that data with a human approach as well. So we're supporting the individual and the organisation. So it's very much looking at the job demands and the resources. Are the resources in alignment with that as well? So it's that kind of approach, really.
Well, 100%, and I don't. I wasn't trying to make a mutually.
No.
And to your point, so for us, you know, every role exhibits certain skills and behaviors. For example, the skills and behaviors of a CPA look a lot different than a business development marketing guy or lady, right? So having those objective, you know, those objectively identify those objective and those identified skills and behaviors, measuring those individuals on that, and then also on your organization's mission and vision, right? Those are the one thing that doesn't change. So there are some things that, you know, sit at the organization level that we're all equally kind of evaluated on the alignment on, and then there are those individual, you know, those role-based things that those individuals are measured and aligned on. But that's one piece of it, right? Your role, those skills, values, and behaviors, how that measures, and then there is the human side, the actual feedback, the emotive side. For example, in like a pulse check or a little pulse survey or daily check-in, you know, do you have the support you feel like you need? Well, that is a very subjective question. It's an important one, right? And so you got to have kind of both. And this is the thing: you need to have both together to provide context, because one all by itself and the other all by itself sitting apart make it really hard. You know, again, if I'm the king of this data pile and you're the king of that data pile, we got to get together and kind of have some general consensus. Well, it's really hard the way that, you know, people kind of compartmentalize this information today. So having a way to unify it, aggregate it, and then provide that objective historical narrative so we can agree. Part of our meetings start with, well, do you know that this happened? Yeah, I do. But do you know that that happened? Yeah, I do. Okay, well, now let's talk about what we're going to do collectively. And if
I
you
think one thing you just said, Anthony, which is really important, is the contextual part. So it's one thing to have information, it's another to put it in context.
Absolutely.
So everything about how people feel, their emotions, their perspectives, all of that has to be aggregated in a way that's intelligible for action. And so you have to have a systematic way of doing that, even if it's one person's opinion this year versus the next year. Well, what changed that then spurned the change in their opinion and how they view working there, engaging there, participating there? Because I think we all can agree that if you've hired a person or you brought them on as a contractor or a partner, that you needed their skill set or you wanted their involvement on a level in order to push the company forward. So we want them to still see that they have a benefit inside of that company, and that the way that they view the world is important to the overall success of that company. Brenda, I think you had a question. Is that right? Do you still have one?
I had a comment, but I go ahead on. It's fine.
You sure? Because
Yeah.
I really want to hear your comment. I want your words
Well,
to hit my ears.
well, I have I have to be careful here because we're recorded. I have a couple of large organizations that live and die by engagement surveys, impact surveys, which in my opinion are a snapshot in time, depending on what
Yes.
has occurred in my life, in my work life in the past, week or 10 days will influence and inform how I respond to those questions. Certainly there's a comment component that helps to regulate that. I'm happy to hear what you said about using the psychometrics. I use a lot of performance models and behavioral models and things like that. And I think, augmenting impact or engagement type surveys, with something that's grounded with reliability and validity metrics is important. But I think it's also important for these things to show up in the fabric of the organization across across evaluative measures throughout the year, not just once every 6 months or once every 12 months and things like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Brenda, this we use this in a way that suits the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some organizations, you may want them to start. This also depends on the interventions, because what you're doing is you're measuring at the outset the experience, maybe across the organization, and that will be departmental led. So you'll have different experiences in different departments. So, for example, in a big organization, it might take 6 to 9 months, depending on how bureaucratic that organization is. It might take some time for them to implement those interventions, whereas in some organizations that may be much quicker, that they've got to implement the intervention and then embed it into it, so that the remeasurement to see how effective that has been for the people and their experience might be different across organizations, but it may also be different across departments. So your timing of those remeasurements may be very different. And that's why your program may encapsulate different timings for different areas.
So as we look at this map right here, this map is one way that the Business Health Institute goes about understanding how to increase engagement or performance. My recommendation for general health of your business is to make sure that you have something implemented to where you can monitor what's going on with your team members, and that it is objectionable and it's something that you can stand on, so that your comparisons can make really good sense. If you're changing the target all the time, you actually don't know what to pinpoint. It could be everything from a leadership style to the type of work that you're doing to something as simple as recognition. Even though recognition sounds simple, there's a lot of entities that just don't participate in that. And then all of a sudden, the workers or the team members don't feel appreciated, their engagement goes down and the performance goes down. So whatever those keys need to be, you need to track those keys consistently. Anything else anyone wants to add or contribute to this slide before we move to the next one? All right, as we go from there, high levels of employee engagement can greatly impact an organization's profitability. The reason why I took the time to read that is because you're in business to generate money, even if you're a nonprofit. There's this misnomer that nonprofits don't generate money, and that's just a flat out lie, and it's false. The number one rule is to generate the money to drive the mission. So in this instance, we should all be thinking about our profitability. And I can tell you and submit to you that it does not matter how good your service is as it relates to the thing you're offering or your product. The humans that are offering the service or the product determine the ultimate success of a business. So if their well-being has been reduced, your product will not be as good. There's about one, and I mean this too, I don't know how this is going to resonate with everyone else, but like Chinese food is the only place where people can be miserable and it won't matter. You'll still buy it. Everything else, if the people aren't happy, then it's going to go down, right? That's about what's going to happen. So in this instance, when we look at a number such as 82% of employees at companies that perform well financially are highly or moderately engaged compared to just 68% at underperforming companies. Are there any examples out of any of you business owners, managers, leaders out there that can identify a time when you saw your team members, your employees, your contractors, when they were engaged, you saw high production? And then all of a sudden, when engagement waned, your production went in reverse. I'm really hoping some human can provide a story or an opportunity when that really happened. Can I learn from somebody here? I'm going to stare at this screen until somebody gives me what I just requested. I promise I will. Artie, Day-Day, what is Prosper Jete? Am I saying that right? I have no idea if my Detroit accent is allowing me to say that appropriately.
That's correct, Dr. Baker.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Give me an example, if you can, in your world, whether it was something recent, something very old and recycled, when people were engaged, things were better, then all of a sudden engagement reduced, and then your productivity reduced. Has that happened to you in your lifetime?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, humans working with people is always very tricky. I always remember, one of my senior directors of HR, they always say, working with with equipment, no matter how huge that equipment is actually much easier than just working with humans, because with people, we have so many things that comes into play that includes emotions, people are different. So I think at the end of the day, especially like myself, I lead a group of people, both onshore and offshore. I feel like, they need to be heard. Like you just can't treat them as products or as something else. You just need to treat them as people, understanding, where what angle they're coming from, and kind of trying to put that in perspective. Usually, like if I do that, I feel like, I get the best out of my teams. So I think you brought up a great point there. I totally agree that definitely, if there's no engagement and people feel like they are not being heard, or maybe, their feelings are always not being taken into consideration, there's always going to be a conflict, and that will probably maybe lead into undesirable results for the organization. So I think, I wasn't really prepared on this, but I think this is a very, very interesting topic, so that, I think it just needs to be explored a little bit more so that we can learn from it.
Thank you for that contribution. And I'm going to share a story with you all, and I hope this story is awesome and not stupid. So if it's stupid, I want somebody to tell me it's a dumb story, but I'm going to give it anyway. So I used to be the director of sales at an automotive company that's pretty large here in Ohio, in the Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky region, so 3-state region here in the Midwest. I was #1 in sales in 5 industries. So I think it's safe to say that I know how to sell something since 1994. I know how to teach it, and I've been amazing at it for 3 decades. Point is, I get into the automotive sector and I start to build out my teams. And if you can imagine, in the automotive sales position, everything is about how much have you sold. They do not care about anything else, but did you sell a lot of cars and did you make a lot of cars? That was not my position. So the owner and I would always butt heads. I mean, boy, would we argue and we would duke it out. And if you can't tell, I kind of don't bite my tongue. I say what the heck I want, and I need you to hear what the heck I'm saying. So I'm going at him and he's going at me. And I'm telling him I'm the best performer in a 100-year history of this franchise. And I'm the best by percentage year over year in a 5-year span. And he couldn't understand how and why. But to your point, Prosper, is this: I did not make my sales professionals sell all the time. And that seems like an oxymoron. I also hired people that were not great salespeople. And you would say, well, that doesn't make any really good sense. What I did is I made them a team. And so some people just needed a job and they were happy to just have a job. So as long as they could earn enough to pay their rent and play video games, they assisted the other people that were high performers. So I kept low performers on the team because they felt like they were a part of a team and it met their needs. Other high level sales performers didn't want to make or didn't want to do administrative duties. They hate it. They just want to set appointments and sell something, set appointment, sell something. So when it comes to paperwork, they didn't want to do that. So I had the lower performers do the paperwork and they felt great about their contribution, where the high sales performer felt great about them tag teaming that. So we then sold as a team as opposed to pushing them against each other for competition. So we got rid of the sales boards. We got rid of all the metrics that says this is a great performer and you're a bad performer. And the whole thing was about team. But the point of me telling you all this is that that had to do with employee well-being. The better they felt about where they were, that low performer could walk around in the city and say, I'm a part of the #1 selling team in the city, even though they barely contributed on the actual cash register revenue generating side. They were more on the operational side, but either way, we all were able to achieve more. Does all of that make good sense or no? Or did I just say some stuff that you ain't feel like hearing?
Yeah,
Perfect
I
sense.
think
And
it's
I
perfect.
bet those high
Perfect.
performers made those quote low performers way better, even if they were doing the administrative work. I mean, you know, you would argue you'd want people that are highly engaged and above average in performance than you would want the highest performance person that was lowly engaged, because that person becomes a drain on the well. You know, like if you're get around negative people, nobody wants to be around negative people. And if you got a negative people in the workplace, nobody wants to go to the workplace.
So Anthony, check this out. Now this is a pop quiz. I'll cash app somebody $100 if you know what I'm about to say. I promise. Just put your cash app right in, or your Zelle, or however you receive electronic money, and I'll send it to you if you got it. Anybody knows what electromagnetic radiation is?
That's just the natural radiation that happens from any kind of electronic, like your phone, for example, like having a phone call.
Kinda. That's a good guess, but you're close. Anybody else want to help Anthony out? I'm over here trying to give away free money and I don't have everybody clicking on. I don't know what to do with that. It could be $1 or $1,000. You don't know what I'm gonna send you. All right, I'll help you out. Electromagnetic radiation, some people will call the spirit. Some might call energy. That's how when people say that dog can sense evil or a baby can sense evil, that's magnetic radiation. We all have it. So when Anthony mentions that dark cloud in a place, that's not kind of like just intuition. It's a very real thing and it can be quantified. So when Nancy shows up and everybody like, oh, hot dang, here come Nancy, and you want to get away, that's because her radiation came in the room. Or if Frank comes in and everybody feels great, like we can do anything because Frank is here, that's radiation. So in that instance, when we're looking at employee well-being, your radiation can be drugged down, which will stop all your profitability because there's too much negative radiation in that room. And then it permeates even when you go home. Has anybody ever said, I don't feel like going to work the next day because such and such gonna be there? And you're like, oh, you can barely sleep. All of it's ruining your life. They're just an anvil and you wish they would just disappear. Maybe you're that person and you don't know people feel about that about you, but it's a very real thing. So when we look at productivity, profitability, everyone's well-being plays a part in that. And so what I hope that you all are thinking about as you're listening to us is, how does this fit in my workplace? I imagine that many of you are leaders in your space, business owners, which means you kind of control your universe at some level. You are making a decision on who you're participating with. So what does that mean by well-being? Any other thoughts or components to this slide before we switch to the next one?
And can I just say, Dr. Baker,
Absolutely.
that makes a difference as well for your position in the organization, doesn't it? At those higher senior levels, you've got a lot more on autonomy and generally more alignment to the company's vision. So how do you ensure that those people at the lower levels of the organization are actually as engaged? They understand what they need to perform well.
Well, you know, if your bottom isn't
full
good, it falls out, right, Julie? If your bottom's bad, everything falls out.
Absolutely.
But we tend to ignore the bottom because it's on the bottom.
Yes.
Right, which is bad decision making. Brenda just wrote a question: how do you tie in belonging and inclusiveness? And so I've got some answers on that, but I'm going to push to the Health Institute to get their answers first.
Belonging Sorry, Jackie, go on.
I was just going to say, people need to feel safe in their environment. And then when they feel safe and they feel free to be able to speak and talk, that creates a sense of safety and they're understood. But also, as Dr. Baker shared there, that wonderful story of how he got his team to collaborate and work together was absolutely fantastic. And that's what's needed. It's recognizing everybody's ability and what they are able to contribute and making them feel worthwhile. People then start to feel they belong. And when people belong, they want to give more because it makes them feel good. They're part of something. And that's a community of people. And if you've got psychological safety in the workplace, then that's a really great starting place, in my opinion. Julie, you may have something more to add.
Yeah, I think how we work with our data and human approach, we're providing that psychological safety. We're also giving the people and the organisation leaders the understanding of what the interventions need to be for maximum return on investment. And that helps the people feel supported. You're supporting them as an individual on an individual basis, anonymously, but also on a group collective basis. So when they see the changes being made, they actually feel like their voice has been heard without them actually communicating that. They feel like their voice has been heard. There's an impact to that. And they see change and they feel part of that change. So that contributes also to the inclusivity.
I want to add to that, Julie, which is really important when you talked about the human engagement side. I'm going to give everybody something for free right here. I'm talking about typically I force people to pay for the next thing I'm about to tell you. So write this down and respect me over the fact that you will write this down. Is that my first PhD is in business and leadership. There's different leadership styles. So I'm going to give you what has been widely researched for hundreds of years and also been applied in real world scenarios. Is that I could spend time going through all the different leadership styles to prove this point, but I'm not gonna. Is that one is transformational leadership. Transformational leadership is not an opinion, it's 4 constructs. The 4 constructs, you remember them in an acronym called MICS, M-I-C-S. So the first one is inspired motivation. Inspired motivation is number 1. Number 2 is idealized influence. I submit to you that influence is internal, it's not external, and it's not both. It's only internal. A person will only do what they are connected to doing. No one from the outside can make them do a thing unless they already have it inside of them. The third is individual consideration. So that's individual consideration. And the last is intellectual stimulation. Intellectual stimulation. So there's a letter I with all 4, then it's MICS, M-I-C-S. Inspired motivation, idealized influence, individual consideration, intellectual stimulation. So to your question, Brenda, what happens is I only know if you belong if I engage with you to find out if you feel like you belong. And I can only include you if you want to be included. So in this instance, individual consideration, that one construct of transformational leadership would allow me to explore you in a very real way to determine if you feel like you belong and if you're included and if that framework exists for that inclusion. Is that making good sense or no? Am I losing anybody? So from there, what becomes really important is understanding the spirit of cooperation. So the spirit of cooperation says that we all can agree. We do have a fundamental belief system as humans that we're going to disagree on things, but I'm going to give you an example. Let's say, for an example, we all decided here that we were hungry and we need to eat in 15 minutes. We'll probably have a disagreement on what we're going to eat because Anthony wants tacos, I want ribs, right? Julie wants a salad. So because of that, we're going to be all over the place. But we can agree that we're hungry and we want to eat. So the spirit of cooperation says, well, the top thing on the menu is eating. That's number 1. And then you work from there because the more yeses you can provide, the more belonging starts to happen. That is a real exercise that the appointed leader has to go through. And that increases employee well-being. So you have a scenario that if you employ transformational leadership, you'll understand the thinking mechanisms of all of the subordinates, team members, and partners that you're responsible for. And you'll find a way to have the spirit of cooperation that then makes them understand that at least the appointed leader is trying to make sure that I'm included and that I belong and that I'm important. And that increases engagement. All of that make really good sense? And we do all of that, we make more money. And the more money we make and we reduce other costs and we find a way to exist within our industry, the more sustainable we are, the more viable we are, which is the point of why we're in business. So I'm going to speed through a little bit because we got about 15 minutes in order to respect the time frame that we have. So we're going to go to the next slide here. And Julie, I'll go ahead and push to you.
So when we as Dr. Baker said, people are valuable assets. And when we first recruit someone, they're often in the honeymoon period. They're in that honeymoon phase for the first 3 to 6 months. You've recruited the right person, they're energized, they're aligned with everything, and then they may start to experience an influx of stress. What does that look like? Well, I'm not quite sure. It may look like I'm not quite sure what's expected of me. Oh, I haven't got the resources to do a particular task. I'm struggling with my internet connection when I work from home. Or it might be that my manager doesn't give me much autonomy. But that stress starts to build. And over time, that can become prolonged. And as that becomes prolonged stress, and those resources aren't provided, that stress isn't reduced, that can lead to us becoming more cynical over time and us falling into burnout. And if that becomes habitual, then what we're talking about is all of those things that reduce the individual. You may start with somebody who's really engaged and contributing a lot to the bottom line of the organization, but from my own experience from working for an organization and ending up in burnout, where I was consistently an 8.5 out of 10 9 performer, I ended up probably about 40-50% for a considerable period of time before I was off long-term sick. Now that organization lost a high-performing employee. They had to pay sick for a long period of time, a longish period of time. What's that doing not only to the bottom line, but to the organization, to the team as well? How does that impact those people you're working with and the bottom line of the organization? I know that had a big impact on the organization I was working with. So, you know, it's what that looks like. And have you experienced that in any organization you've worked with, or you've seen other people experience that? What does that bring up for you, for any of you?
Well, I think in this instance, Julie, as you explain that and how difficult that can be in the workplace, as you're thinking about her positioning, I want you to look at some of these images. Look at influx of stress. Look at just the upside nature of prolonged stress. I know when I see that, I've seen people look like this in the workplace. So Rutherford, I'm gonna push it to you because I'm curious to hear your experiences. Have you felt this way? Have anyone that you've been in control of or in charge of felt this way? Have you seen this play out in the workspace? Can you give us an example of what that looks like in your world? And if you ever had a remedy or a solution to overcome it?
Yeah, of course, I've seen this, in the workplace. I've seen it many, many times, and I think as part of being a leader is understanding when that's happening and when you can go in, when you can go and interact, because people will change. The words they'll use, how they respond in certain situations. You will be able to, if you're paying attention, I should say this, if you're paying attention to that individual, you will see a difference. And I can give you an example of when I was working with somebody and their work just fell off. There was something, and I pulled that person aside and I said, tell me, you're not as you're not as great as you used to be. Tell me what's going on in your, and he told me about stuff, divorce or whatever was going on. And so, but in other situations, it's just been, there's so much stuff going on, they feel overwhelmed, and I had to take stuff away from them.
Mm-hmm.
Because they just, everyone handles stress and workload differently.
Mm-hmm.
I in that situation jumped in and said, okay, I'm going to take these 3 assignments. I want you to focus here till you're ready. Let me know, and then we can add back 1 or 2 things when that time is right. So there's no question that happens all the time. It's upon the leader of the organization or that group to recognize it, because a lot of times the individual won't say anything. They
It's
won't.
also very important to understand the why behind what is the why behind why that person has suddenly become into that position of burnout, high stress. What is it? Is it personal? Is it within the work environment? So it's really important to get to understand the why, because then you can actually put the right intervention in place.
Correct.
And one thing that you just mentioned was the silence. How many of us are dealing with silent quitting, or people that are choosing to gig? On and on. I mean, there's so many new terms now. I didn't think I was this old, but I feel like it, and my grade keeps showing me. But I can't keep up with all the terminology for ways to just give up, right? Or to be irritated, or to feel unwanted, and I'm like, well, I need a new dictionary. And they're using these things in the workplace to reduce the productivity. And if you own a company, you kind of don't have time for that, especially now. I don't know all the statistics in the UK and in some of the other places, but I know in the US, 85% of businesses are single member LLCs. And so because that's a real thing, if you bring in a person and that person kind of hates what's going on and you lose them, you're going to lose a big portion of your business. 99% of our people that work at all in the US work for a small business by classification of the Small Business Administration, and that's 50 million and under, 500 employees or less. So even though we think about companies like Google or Intel or Microsoft, that's not the backbone of the United States of America. It's small business. And these people are feeling some kind of way about their workplace. They're not giving it their all. They're not coming up with new ideas. They'll hold an idea and give it to your competitor first. And you're like, well, heck, I trained you. Why would you let me train you, get mad at me, and take my stuff over to somebody else to get rid of me? But that's what happens when they're not engaged or they feel unappreciated, on and on. So Rutherford, thanks so much for that contribution. We've got about 6-7 minutes left, and we've got way more to cover, which we are not going to be able to cover, but I am going to run through just a little bit of this here, is that we've got job demands here. And then Julie or Jackie, do we want to kind of highlight this quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're talking about there is, and links to the previous slide, what is a real important link, and this was one I didn't realize until I experienced burnout, is how the work climate, that level between the job demands and resources, impact the burnout. That was a combination of the work climate and also my personal well-being. My personality contributed to that. I had overcommitment, but that work engagement, because of that work engagement behavior was reduced. I was intending to leave. I was unwell. I was stressed. I ended up being burnt out, as I mentioned earlier. How does that impact to the organizational outcome? I wasn't as present. My productivity was low, and that expectation of a customer service to the outside world was much lower than the performance level I'd ever experienced before. As an individual, I didn't understand the complexity of that when I was going through the burnout phase. And that's very hard for people to understand what is going on with themselves, because this is a gradual creep over time. And that continual stress impacts and reduces the high performer to a low performer.
Absolutely, it does. And we can talk about bridging this gap.
Yes. So bridging that gap between the strategy and delivering value it comes back to that well-being strategy being aligned with the performance strategy. What do your people need? What do they need as a group? What do they need as, what are their personal risks, and how do we support them? And this has always been the thing for me as an ex-finance person. We measure everything else within the organisation. We don't measure the people performance. So those hidden costs are there, and they're hidden behind all that noise that Brenda was talking about before. We don't understand how that noise is impacting the bottom line. So what do? We close that gap.
We do, and then there's assessments there that exist. I know, obviously, Anthony, you guys have a platform that rolls through some of this. I know we talked about having a consistent measure, but even talk a little bit about this, Julie, just as an example.
Yeah, what we're looking at is psychometric assessments to understand the employee effectiveness. This will support the team leaders. You're looking at people's performance energy and how that aligns. And you're also looking at what their motivation looks like, because you want people to be energized, but also motivated to achieve. What do their work engagement levels look like? Do they intend to stay or go? And what's the company loyalty? And if they feel cared, looked after, then that will, we've lost the presentation.
We did
Sorry,
too.
Dr. Baker.
Yeah, I sure did. Hit the wrong button trying to slide over. Bear with me one moment, and
Okay.
boom. And let me
Doug, you're not cutting them off, are you?
What's that?
I said, Doug better not be cutting you off. This is great.
Hold on, let me slideshow this. Start from here, from current slide. No, don't do that. Slideshow from current. Minimize. All right, I think I figured it out, everybody. Yep, we're golden. Back to you, Julie.
Okay. So yeah, we're looking at what the people experience is. You know, how that looks for the individuals, but also collective in terms of the group. So if we go on to the next slide, Dr. Baker, we're looking at then, you know, what does the work climate look like? What are those people, what are the demands on them? What's the work like? What's their mental load and the work related emotional load? You've got to remember, in some situations, people are the work related emotional load, people can be working in very emotive roles, i.e. ambulance drivers, medics, and there's lots of other things that, you know, people can experience compassion fatigue. And what are their resources? The higher our demands are, the higher our resources need to be to cope with those. And as I think it was Anthony said earlier, you know, people respond very differently to stress. That's very individual. So again, it's about supporting the individual and the group. So yeah, it's how do you identify, from my question is, if we'd have had this in our organisation, I would have understood the factors that were contributing to my burnout, and we'd have been able to correct those at a much earlier stage, rather than for me to experience that burnout and lose that connectivity into my role. And you know, as Brenda said earlier, it's how do you drill through that noise to get right to the pinpoint? The crux of
So we would say you've got risk, cost, opportunities. We know that exists with every business that you have, and you know, just kind of looking at some of these unit costs of what that mean. Where I'm going to push us here in our last few moments, because we can talk about case studies, workshops, but really I'm going to go into this prescription for everyone. And if we got any last moment comments, then by all means we'll take them. But one, make sure that you create a well-being strategy. Let's make sure that that exists. So if you don't have one, get one. If you don't know how to do one, then obviously the Business Health Institute knows how to put those together. Anthony knows how to put those together. Maybe we collaborate on how to put those together. Clearly at the Business Hospital, we do as well. Let's pay attention to employee engagement. And when we say employee, I'm actually using that as a universal term for contractors, strategic partnerships, anyone that you need in order to grow your business. Let's make sure that you're paying attention to that. I submit to you that oftentimes gets ignored until the person leaves, or they start to argue, or they throw a bunch of stuff and say, I hate you. That's when you start paying attention to it. Let's do it beforehand. Let's increase our own self-awareness. I find that self-awareness gets ignored because you get into the grind of your daily work and you don't take the time to think about these things. You want to use metacognition, which is the science of thinking about what you think about. So make sure you're doing that. Understand your company demands. Sometimes your demands could be too high as a appointed leader. Let's make sure that we are adequately understanding that. And the word that we used earlier was contextual. So if you've got a beginner or somebody in an entry level, don't give them senior level work and think they're supposed to do it and tell them to rise to the occasion. Or if someone is senior level, don't give them elementary work and bore them to death and not trust them to get the job done, and vice versa. And then lastly here, remember that well-being is connected to company success. You have to think about that because as we spoke earlier and Prosper mentioned it, that people are really the driving force of everything that you have. They really are. So whether you got a product or a service, remember the people that are administering that. So in our last 30 to 45 seconds, is there anything that anybody wants to add, talk about, clarify, anything so we can respect your workday?
Really outstanding information. I think it potentially could be something that we should be doing on a regular basis. We all need to improve our business. Dr. Deming talked about data is the only thing we should be talking about. Everything else is an opinion. We're not in business to hear people's opinions. We're in business to make results. And the only way to get really good results is through data and understanding it. And you've really touched on some really key points. I felt like we kind of scratched the surface here. There's so much more to cover. So thank you, Dr. Baker. Thank you to the J&J team as well for all of your leadership on this important topic. Would any or all of you like to make any final comments?
I really enjoyed it, guys. This was one of the best. I really, Dr. Baker, this was great. I'd look forward to connecting with you offline or online in a different platform. Julie and Jackie, thank you so much. This has been enlightening. I really just applaud your work. Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Appreciated.
Well, we put our information in there. If anybody wants to copy it, you can. We'll follow up with those that would desire it. If not, let's tear up Friday and be amazing today. Don't be average. If you average, throw yourself off a bridge. Be amazing today, all right?
So Becca, that was great.
Take care, guys.
Absolutely.
Thank
All
you.
right, guys, have a great one.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you.
And unstoppable. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you. Bye-bye.